There is a version of you that you haven't met yet. Not a fantasy version, not a manic new era announcement, but a quieter, colder evolution that happens when a man stops bargaining with his own mind, when he stops needing permission from comfort, when he stops needing witnesses for his effort. And if that version stood in front of you today, you might not recognize him at first, because he wouldn't look like someone trying to become something. He would look like someone who already decided, someone who already paid the price, someone who already buried the negotiations and kept walking. Some men discover early that motivation is unreliable, that excitement is a drug with a short half-life, that confidence is a visitor who disappears the moment rent is due. And those men, without making speeches about it, start building something else, something that doesn't require good feelings, something that doesn't depend on the weather inside the chest, something that holds its shape on the days that feel empty and the nights that feel long. And what they build is not a habit, not a hack, not a trick, but a posture, an internal stance, a way of moving through hours without asking the hours to be easy. You can feel it when it's present, because the mind stops performing, stops searching for a soundtrack, stops turning life into a scene where everything needs to be meaningful right now. And instead, there is a plain, almost indifferent clarity, a simple awareness that the body will do what it does and the mind will say what it says, and neither of them are in charge of the mission. And that is where the real shift begins, not with intensity, not with aggression, but with a kind of calm refusal. The refusal to be pulled around by impulses that appear loud only because they have been obeyed for so long. This is the unnamed way, the thing people sense without being able to name. The man who doesn't rush, who doesn't explain, who doesn't leak his future out of his mouth in exchange for quick validation. The man who can be in a room full of noise and still remain eternally quiet, because the center of him is not located in other people's eyes. And the strange part is that it doesn't look heroic at all. It looks almost ordinary until you realize how rare it is to see someone who isn't constantly reacting, someone who isn't always telling you what he's about to do, someone who isn't trying to be understood. And not everyone is built for that, not because they're inferior, not because they're weak in some moral sense, but because most people live by immediate relief, by emotional approval, by the soft comfort of being liked in the moment. And they don't even notice the cost, because the cost doesn't arrive like a bill in the mail. It arrives quietly as a life that keeps repeating itself. The same promises, the same resets, the same Monday mornings that feel like apologies. That's where the separation happens, and it's not dramatic. It's not a war against other people. It's simply an internal divergence between those who chase feelings and those who watch feelings come and go without letting them drive, between reactors and waiters, between men who need a mood to start and men who start and let the mood catch up later, between the ones who announce and the ones who disappear, between the ones who burn bright for a week and the ones who move like stone for years. Reactors live in a state of constant negotiation because every task becomes a conversation with fatigue, every plan becomes a debate with fear, every small discomfort becomes a reason to postpone, and their lives become a series of almost consistent, almost disciplined, almost different. And because they're not stupid, they notice the pattern, and because they notice the pattern, they start to hate themselves for it. And the hatred becomes another emotional storm that they try to medicate with distraction, and the loop tightens. And it looks like laziness from the outside, but inside it feels like being trapped in a room where the door is unlocked and still somehow impossible to push open. Waiters are different, not because they never feel that storm, but because the storm doesn't get a vote. Because somewhere along the line they realize that feelings are not commands, and they stop treating impulses like kings. And the moment a man stops obeying every internal voice, something dangerous begins to form, because now manipulation becomes harder. Now temptation becomes less persuasive. Now other people's moods stop being the steering wheel. You've seen this kind of person before, maybe at work, maybe in sports, maybe in a room where everyone else is talking, performing, trying to be noticed, and one man is just present, not cold in a theatrical way, not edgy, just calm, just contained. And his containment makes the room slightly uneasy because most people are used to reading others by their reactions. And when reactions disappear, when the face stays neutral and the eyes stay clear, the usual tactics stop working. The teasing, the guilt, the flattery, the provocation, and suddenly they don't know where they stand. This is where a certain old realism becomes relevant, not as a quote to post, not as a costume, but as a lens, because Machiavelli never wrote for the pure-hearted image of man. He wrote for the world as it is, for the fact that people respond to incentives, to pressure, to fear of consequence, to the predictability of patterns, and whether someone agrees with him or not. His mind understood a simple truth. What can be predicted can be managed, and what cannot be predicted becomes expensive to challenge. A disciplined man becomes expensive to challenge, not because he threatens people, not because he postures, but because he stops providing easy leverage. When someone can tell that a man will fold when tired, they wait for tiredness. When someone can tell that a man will break when lonely, they let loneliness do the work. When someone can tell that a man will abandon his standards for approval, they offer approval like a leash. Most men never notice the leash. Some do. And once a man feels the leash, he starts noticing the quiet places where he has been selling his future for short comfort, selling his integrity for quick relief, selling his time for distraction. And the noticing is painful because it removes excuses, because it reveals that the prison was not built by fate, it was built by daily choices that felt harmless at the time. That's why the first real change is often silence. Not the silence of sulking, not the silence of trying to look mysterious, but the practical silence of not broadcasting, not explaining, not leaking intention before execution, because there is a strange weakness in announcing a new self before the work is done, and people call it motivation, but it's often just early payment, early applause, a counterfeit sense of progress that drains the pressure needed to actually transform. You can feel the difference between a man who talks about his plans and a man who carries his plans like a concealed blade, because one is asking the world to validate him, and the other is simply moving, and silence creates a vacuum, and vacuums make people project, and projections make them nervous because they don't know what's being built, they don't know what's being removed, they don't know what line has been crossed internally. In silence, a man is allowed to be imperfect without spectators, allowed to fail without commentary, allowed to refine without being labeled. And that privacy is not a luxury, it's protection. Because most people, even when they mean well, will try to shape the thing they cannot understand. And if they cannot shape it, they will try to interpret it. And if they cannot interpret it, they will try to mock it. And none of that matters when the work is real. But it matters in the early stages when the identity is still soft and forming. So some men go quiet, not forever, not dramatically, just enough to remove the audience from their evolution. They stop explaining why they're leaving early. They stop debating their routines. They stop responding to every message like their attention is public property. They start treating time like something that can be stolen in small amounts until nothing remains. And once time is treated as sacred, the noise starts to sound expensive. This is not a moral lecture, it's just the physics of focus. And then, without announcing it, the cheap dopamine starts getting cut away. Not out of purity, not out of guilt, but out of respect for the mission, because a man can't build something demanding while constantly draining himself on things that ask nothing of him. The ones who do this aren't always the loudest or the most impressive in the beginning, and that's what confuses people. Because the culture worships visible intensity, visible struggle, visible transformation, but the most real transformations happen quietly under the surface, where nobody can clap, where nobody can sabotage, where nobody can interrupt with opinions disguised as concern. And somewhere inside that silence, another shift happens. The emotional shift, the one people misunderstand. Disciplined men are not numb. They feel the same boredom, the same doubt, the same resistance, the same internal whining voice that wants comfort and certainty and immediate reward. The difference is that they stop treating that voice like an authority. They treat it like weather. Bad weather is real and it can be acknowledged, but it doesn't become the commander of the day. The rain doesn't decide the mission. The storm doesn't get to vote on whether the body moves. And when a man begins to operate that way, his emotions stop being enemies and start being information, signals of fatigue, signals of stress, signals of desire, signals of fear, and he notices them the way a strategist notices a map, with attention but without surrender. This is emotional alchemy, not the motivational kind, not the turn pain into power slogan, but the quieter conversion where discomfort becomes ordinary, where the friction of doing what is required becomes familiar, where the mind learns that it can scream and still be ignored. And that is when a man starts to scare himself a little, not because he's becoming cruel, but because he's becoming consistent. Consistency is frightening because it is indifferent to excuse. Consistency doesn't care about yesterday. Consistency doesn't care about mood. Consistency doesn't care about whether the work feels glamorous. It simply happens, and over time it becomes identity, and identity moves without negotiation. And this is where the mirror appears, because there is one arena where a man cannot hide from himself, one arena where excuses show up as numbers, where emotion shows up as mistakes, where impatience shows up as losses, and that arena is trading. Trading has a way of stripping the personality down to its nervous system, not in a poetic way, but in a brutal, factual way. Because the market does not reward need, it does not reward hope, it does not reward the story a man tells himself about what he deserves. It rewards timing, clarity, restraint, and execution. And for most people, this becomes a psychological trap, because the same patterns that ruin life ruin trading, only faster. The same man who promises himself discipline on Monday and collapses by noon is the man who tells himself he will wait for clean conditions and then chases a candle because he feels left out. The same man who seeks external approval is the man who needs the market to validate him immediately, who takes a position and then stares at it like a judge, begging it to confirm that he is smart, that he is worthy, that he is finally different. The same man who avoids discomfort is the man who moves his stop, who holds losers because admitting he is wrong feels like death, who closes winners early because the anxiety of giving back profit feels unbearable. And all of it is the same underlying wound. The need for certainty, the need for control over outcomes, the refusal to accept that the only real control is behavior. You've probably lived that cycle in some form, the strategy hopping, the endless searching for the one thing that will remove responsibility, the late night videos, the screenshots, the dopamine rush of a new system, CLS dressed in new words every week, the belief that the answer's out there somewhere. And then the market opens and the old nervous system shows up again, the old impatience, the old fear, the old craving to be right. And the man realizes that information was never the issue, because there is no shortage of information. There is only a shortage of self-command. And that realization can feel like a condemnation, but it isn't. It's clarity. Trading doesn't punish ignorance as much as it exposes inconsistency. It exposes the way a man handles being wrong. It exposes whether he can wait without feeling like he's dying. It exposes whether he can do nothing, which is one of the hardest disciplines on earth, because doing nothing feels like losing to the impatient mind. It exposes whether he confuses activity with progress. It exposes whether he needs action to escape his own thoughts. Many people enter trading thinking it will be a shortcut to freedom, and some people do find freedom there, but not the kind they expected, because the freedom is not the money. The freedom is the nervous system that no longer panics, the mind that no longer chases, the identity that no longer begs. This is why trading becomes a mirror, because it gives a man the same choice again and again, the same fork in the road, chase or wait, react or observe, prove or execute, and every choice reveals something. And the revealing is relentless, because the market will show the truth daily without insulting you, without praising you, without caring at all. So the hunter archetype emerges, not as a title, not as a brand, but as a recognizable operating system. A hunter does not sprint through the forest making noise and hoping something appears. A hunter watches. A hunter learns the terrain. A hunter understands timing, understands that the impulse to move is not the same as the right moment to move, understands that hunger does not create opportunity, it only creates desperation, and desperation is loud, and loud things get noticed and punished. In trading, the hunter is the one who can sit through hours of nothing without turning it into a crisis, who can watch price move without feeling personally challenged by it, who can accept that missing a move is cheaper than chasing it, who can let the market pass like a river without trying to scoop every drop into his hands. This person isn't perfect. He still feels the itch. He still feels the temptation to click. He still feels the desire to be involved, but he doesn't worship that desire. He watches it like a scientist watches a reaction, and when conditions align, when the signal is clean, when the structure is present, when CLS is not a fantasy but a reality, he executes with the same calm that he uses to brush his teeth, not because it's trivial, but because his nervous system has learned that execution is behavior, not emotion. That is what most people don't understand when they talk about discipline. They imagine discipline as effort, as white-knuckling, as grinding with teeth clenched. But the deeper form of discipline is quieter. It is lifestyle. It is a floor that does not collapse when the mood changes. It is the kind of repetition that feels almost boring. And boredom is not an enemy here. Boredom is sacred because boredom means the nervous system is no longer addicted to chaos. The hunter-trader's life starts to look simple from the outside because there are fewer dramatic swings, fewer frantic changes, fewer desperate late-night resets, and inside that simplicity feels like power. Because a man who can repeat the same clean behaviors without needing fireworks becomes impossible to derail. He doesn't need a big win to feel alive. He doesn't need a big loss to feel punished. He doesn't need to tell people what he's building. He builds. He doesn't need to be seen. He needs to be consistent. And consistency is what creates the strange phenomenon where other people start acting different around him, not because he demands respect, but because his presence is no longer porous, no longer begging, no longer asking, no longer available for manipulation. People try the old buttons, the guilt, the teasing, the come on, loosen up, the why are you so serious, the you've changed, and they don't get the reaction they expect, and they don't always become angry. Sometimes they become nervous because they feel the boundary, and boundaries make emotional people uncomfortable. This is where isolation becomes a weapon, not in the romantic sense of disappearing to look impressive, but in the practical sense of reducing the number of hands on your steering wheel. When a man spends time alone, real alone, no constant audio, no constant scrolling, no constant stimulation, the mind starts bringing up unpaid debts, unfinished thoughts, old shame, old fear, and most people run from that because it feels heavy, because it feels like being confronted. But some people stay in it long enough for the noise to settle, and once it settles, something else appears. A clean inner voice that doesn't perform, a simple knowing of what matters and what doesn't. The disciplined man becomes comfortable with being misunderstood because he's no longer building his life for applause. He becomes comfortable with fewer invitations. He becomes comfortable with being slightly inconvenient to other people's expectations. He doesn't announce monk mode. He simply becomes less available. He becomes brief. He becomes direct. He becomes hard to distract. And in trading, this looks like not needing to be in every session, not needing to force trades for entertainment, not needing to prove intelligence through activity, not needing to revenge trade to reclaim pride, because pride is one of the most expensive emotions a man can bring into a market. Some people hear this and turn it into a moral identity, but the hunter doesn't moralize. He just notices cause and effect. He notices that when he is scattered, he pays. He notices that when he is patient, he is rewarded, not always immediately, not always predictably, but over time. He notices that the market does not reward the man who wants it badly. It rewards the man who can wait without wanting. And waiting is not passive. Waiting is discipline. Waiting is a kind of internal strength. Waiting is the ability to sit with the urge to act and let it burn itself out, the way a storm burns itself out when you stop running into it. And that brings the whole arc back to the deeper truth. Discipline is identity. Not the identity you tell people about. Not the identity you post. The identity your calendar reveals. The identity your bank account reveals. The identity your trading journal reveals. The identity your body reveals. The identity your relationships reveal. Because discipline is not what a man does when he feels like it. Discipline is what he does when he doesn't. And over time, it stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like who he is. And when it becomes who he is, the old self starts to die quietly, not in a dramatic funeral, but in the daily absence of old behaviors. The old self dies the first time a man doesn't explain himself. The old self dies the first time a man feels the urge to chase and chooses to wait. The old self dies the first time he closes a losing trade cleanly and doesn't negotiate with it. The old self dies the first time he does the work without telling anyone. The old self dies the first time he is tempted and remains unmoved. And what replaces it is not a monster, not a tyrant, not a caricature of coldness, but a sovereign, a man who governs himself, a man whose internal kingdom has order, whose emotions are allowed to exist but not allowed to rule, whose standards are not up for public debate, whose time is protected, whose attention is scarce. A man who stops being controllable becomes unsettling. And the unsettling part is not that he becomes cruel, it's that he becomes unbribable. He can't be bribed with comfort. He can't be bribed with praise. He can't be bribed with outrage. He can't be bribed with urgency. He can't be bribed with fear. He can feel fear and still execute. He can feel boredom and still repeat. He can feel fatigue and still keep his standards. He can feel loneliness and still stay on course. And in trading, that is everything, because the market is a machine that offers bribes all day. Bribes of excitement, bribes of revenge, bribes of one more trade, bribes of just move the stop, bribes of it will come back, bribes of don't miss this. And the hunter simply watches the bribes float by like leaves in a river, because the hunter understands that the most expensive thing in the world is a moment of weakness. Weakness is not a moral flaw. Weakness is a moment where the nervous system grabs the wheel, and the whole path, the cold path, is simply a life built to reduce the number of moments where the nervous system gets to drive. A man doesn't become consistent by hating himself into change. He becomes consistent by removing negotiations, by narrowing options, by making the path simple, by letting boredom become normal, by treating repetition like protection, by making his life less dramatic. And over time, the anxiety goes quiet, not because life becomes easy, but because the mind stops lying to itself. Anxiety often comes from the gap between what a man says he will do and what he actually does. When that gap closes, the mind relaxes. When behavior becomes reliable, the future becomes less frightening. When execution becomes ordinary, the world becomes less loud. And when a man can trust himself, truly trust himself, he stops needing other people's reassurance. He stops needing the market to validate him. He stops needing the next win to feel okay. He stops needing to be loved to feel safe. He becomes harder to move. He becomes harder to shake. He becomes someone who can sit in discomfort without turning it into drama. And that is why people get nervous around him. Not because he is threatening them, but because he reminds them of something they keep avoiding. The fact that most of their suffering is negotiated, self-created, maintained through daily surrender. And they can sense, even if they can't articulate it, that he has stopped surrendering. There's a quiet moment that comes on this path, a moment where the mind reaches for the old coping mechanisms and doesn't find them, because they aren't being fed anymore. And the moment is uncomfortable, but it is clean, because it proves something. It proves that the old self is not a permanent identity, it's just a pattern that has been rehearsed. Now, patterns can be replaced, not through hype, through repetition, through the ordinary courage of doing the same clean thing again. In trading, that moment might look like watching a setup form and not taking it because the confirmation isn't there, and feeling the itch, feeling the frustration, feeling the fear of missing, and still remaining still, and then watching price do what it does, and realizing that the world didn't end. Realizing that the urge to click was not truth, it was simply noise. And each time that happens, the hunter identity thickens, becomes more real, becomes more inevitable. And that inevitability is the real power. Not dominance over others, not control over outcomes, control over self. That's majesty, and it has a cost, because some paths close quietly behind you, and some people can't follow. Not because they are bad, but because they are built for a different tempo, a different set of priorities, a different relationship with comfort. So the ending of this is not a rallying cry. It's a recognition. If this felt familiar, if it felt less like advice and more like a description of something you've always sensed, then the line has probably already been crossed internally. And after that, it's hard to move the old way. Because once you see how the negotiations work, once you see how distraction steals your power, once you see how impatience taxes your trading, once you see how silence protects your intent, you don't unsee it. The world will keep getting louder. It will keep offering comfort. It will keep offering shortcuts. It will keep offering excuses that sound intelligent. And some men will keep taking them. Others will keep moving differently, quietly, consistently, without needing to be understood, without needing to be applauded, without needing to be loved by everyone they don't respect. They will wait. Then they will execute. If this resonated, you already know why. Comment, I wait, then I execute. And if you want more of these long, controlled reflections, subscribe, not as a pledge, not as an identity, simply as a signal to your future self that you're done negotiating with the noise. Because the old self doesn't die in one dramatic night. He dies in 1,000 small refusals. And once that begins, it tends to continue. Once you see this, you don't unsee it. After this, it's hard to move the old way. Some paths close quietly behind you.